You know, when most of us think of OCD, we picture the classic stuff, right? The repetitive hand washing, the constant checking of locks. But that's really just scratching the surface. Today, we're going to dig a lot deeper, beyond the stereotypes, to really understand the engine that drives this disorder. And we'll explore some of the incredible new paths that are helping people finally break free. Just imagine this for a second. A thought pops into your head. A really disturbing what-if scenario. Now, part of you knows it's absurd, it's totally irrational, but another part of your brain, it just latches on. It treats that thought like it's a real, immediate, terrifying threat. That right there, that's the core experience for millions of people living with OCD.
And this diagram just perfectly lays out the trap. It all starts with that one obsessive thought. That thought triggers this huge wave of distress and anxiety. So to get away from that awful feeling, your brain pushes you to do something, a compulsion, a ritual, some kind of avoidance. And for a moment, it works. You get this little bit of relief. But here's the kicker. That relief is the problem. It accidentally teaches your brain that the compulsion was necessary, which just makes that original thought even bigger and scarier the next time it shows up.
So how in the world do you break a cycle that powerful? Well, for decades, the main answer has basically been to just turn around and face it head-on.
This approach is called exposure and response prevention, or ERP for short, and it is, without a doubt, the evidence-backed, gold standard treatment. The idea is actually pretty simple, but doing it is incredibly tough. You intentionally trigger the obsessive thought. That's the exposure. And then you make the conscious choice to resist the urge to do the compulsion. That's the response prevention. And the logic here, it's pretty solid. It's kind of like lifting weights to build emotional muscle. You're teaching your brain, through direct, lived experience, that the anxiety, as intense as it feels, will eventually fade on its own. And more importantly, that catastrophic thing you were so afraid of, it doesn't actually happen. You prove to yourself that you can handle the distress.
But, and this is a really important but, as powerful as ERP is, it is not a silver bullet. The research is pretty clear that for about a quarter to a third of people, it either doesn't quite work or they find the whole process of constant confrontation so brutal and distressing that they just can't finish the treatment.
And that raises a huge question for the entire field of mental health. What about those folks? Is there another door out of this vicious cycle? Well, that question leads us down a very different path, one that suggests a pretty radical shift in how we look at this. What if, instead of constantly fighting your thoughts, you could just let them be there? Okay, what's so cool about this slide is the contrast. On the left, you've got that classic OCD cycle we just talked about. But look over on the right. This is the model from acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. See how it adds a whole new direction? It's not just about moving away from distress anymore. It introduces the option to move toward the things you actually care about in your life. You see, ACT looks at compulsions a little differently. It calls them a form of experiential avoidance. Now, that's a fancy term for a really simple idea. It's any attempt we make to run away from or get rid of the yucky stuff inside our own heads. Thoughts, feelings, memories, you name it. So from this point of view, a compulsion isn't just some random behavior. It's a strategy to escape from your own mind. So how do you stop running? By finding something that's worth running toward. ACT uses your own core values as your motivation. Suddenly, the goal of an exposure isn't just to tolerate anxiety. It's to do something that matters to you, even with the anxiety. So for someone who's terrified of germs, touching a doorknob isn't just about touching a doorknob. No way. It's about being able to hug their kid without panicking. That value completely changes the game. Okay, so there's another perspective that takes an even bigger step back. It argues that maybe the root problem isn't the scary thought, and it's not the fear itself. What if the real problem is a kind of glitch in the reasoning process that creates the obsession in the first place?
This is the idea behind something called inference-based CBT, or ICBT, and its central concept is something called inferential confusion. This is basically a glitch where the brain gets totally stuck in a what-if loop and starts treating a remote, totally imagined possibility as if it were a real, probable danger. Imagination starts to feel more real than what your own five senses are telling you.
And this chart here just nails the difference. ERP says, go face the fear and prove it's not real. ICBT comes in and says, hold on a second. Let's examine the faulty logic behind the fear. It's not about gritting your teeth and tolerating anxiety. It's about figuring out why that doubt feels so darn convincing, and then learning to trust reality over your imagination.
And here's a totally fascinating insight that comes out of the ICBT research. It turns out people with OCD don't have bad memories. They have low confidence in their memories. And here's the wild part. The more you check the lock, the stove, that email you sent, the less confident you become. Every single check actually weakens your trust in yourself and makes the doubt stronger.
So to fight this, ICBT uses these really practical exercises to rebuild that trust in your own senses. A classic one is the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. When that doubt starts to creep in, you stop, and you intentionally notice 5 things you can see right now, 4 things you can physically touch, 3 things you can hear, and so on. It's all about pulling yourself out of that imaginary world of what-ifs and planting your feet firmly back in what's real, right here, right now.
So the big question is, does this whole reasoning-based approach actually work? Well, check this out. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence is treatment completion rates. This study found that a whopping 85% of people were able to complete ICBT. Compare that to 72% for traditional ERP. The bottom line? People are just way more likely to stick with it.
And it's not hard to see why, right? The same study found that the people who did ICBT rated it as being way less exhausting, less distressing, and less intrusive in their lives. For a lot of people, it seems that questioning their own logic is a much more tolerable path than having to repeatedly face down their absolute worst fears.
Okay, so we've got confrontation, we've got acceptance, and we've got reasoning. 3 really different approaches. So, which one is the best? You know, that's actually the wrong question to be asking.
I think the real takeaway here is that we now have multiple evidence-based roads out of that cycle. You've got ERP, which is all about changing your behavior through confrontation. Then there's ACT, which focuses on changing your relationship with your thoughts through acceptance and moving toward your values. And finally, you've got ICBT, which zeroes in on changing the thinking process itself through better reasoning.
Because at the end of the day, the modern goal for therapy isn't to somehow create a mind that's totally empty of weird or intrusive thoughts. Let's be real, that's impossible for any of us. The real win, the real goal, is to build what's called psychological flexibility. It's the freedom to notice a distressing thought pop up and still be able to choose a response that's in line with the life you want to live, not the one that your fear is screaming about.
Which really leaves us with this one big final thought. As we move away from this old one-size-fits-all model, it really seems like the future of effective mental health care isn't about finding the one superior therapy. It's about getting way, way better and matching the right approach to the right person at the right time. The future of therapy, it seems, is personal.